Hello everyone and welcome again in this video of Python tutorial series. In this video we will be covering data type int and float in details, and we will be performing operations on them too so that we can easily use them and experiment with them. Let's head to the code. Now we know that if we want to create a variable for any integer or any float data type, we can directly assign a variable with the number or any number with a decimal points, so we can declare it as float. So if I check the type of a and b, I'll get a as int and I'll get b as float. So let's say I want to perform operation on my integer. I want to add 5 to it. Let's say a plus 5, that gives me 15. That is 10 plus 5, that gives me 15. Now I want to subtract 10 from a. Now as we can see that a here is 10 and we have never reassigned a. It's just an operation on a that gave me 15. The a's original value is still 10, so if I just subtract 10 from 10, I'll get 0. Now I want to multiply the value in a with, let's say, 2. I got 20 and I want to divide my value of a with, let's say, 5. I got 2.0. Now as you can see, I have divided an integer with an integer and I got the value as float, because I have mentioned that it's float value which contain decimal points. But what if we want to get an integer value in return? There is an operator called as float division in Python to get so. Let's say I want to get the result as an integer for division. I got integer 2. Now float division is just double slash, and for division we use single slash. Float division is to get the integer value in return for any division operation that we want to perform, and by default if we use division operator we will get the answer in float. So let's perform the same operations with b, that is a float variable. So let's say b plus 10, I got 20.5, b minus 5, I got 5.5. Similarly we can perform multiplication and division. Let's try to perform float division on b, that is a float value. That is, we are performing a float division on float value. Let's say I want to get 10.5 divided by 5 in float division. We got 2.0 but as a float. Now let's perform a division, same division operation. We got 2.1. I just did it so that I can give you a brief idea how float division and division works differently with integer and float. A float division will always give you the data type same as the numerator's data type, but it will have 0 precision points. That is, it treats everything beyond the decimal point as 0. So 2.0. Now let's say I want to convert any float variable to integer variable or any float value to integer value. Just like here we got a division 5 2.0. I want to convert 2.0 to integer without using float division. We will have to convert one data type to another data type to do that. In programming we call that typecasting. Let's typecast a float value to an integer value. In Python we will have to use the class of the data type which we require as a result, and we'll have to pass the data type which we want to convert as the parameter of that function. Now we know from our previous video that the class for integer value in Python is int. Now if I want to convert a by 5 to an integer, I'll have to use the class of integer, that is int, and pass the expression or variable or value as parameter in that function. Now let's say I want to convert 1.1 to integer, I got 1. Similarly, if I want to convert a particular expression to give me an integer result, I'll just pass the expression. Now let's see here, if we used a by 5, we got 2.0, but now we are typecasting it to an integer, so 2.0 is typecasted to integer so it will return us 2. Now let's say similarly I want to convert any integer value to a float value. We know that we got the class of float values as float itself, so we used float as function, and if we execute the command we will get 1.0. If you haven't watched the previous video, I'll just show you how we got these classes. We will just have to use the type function here and pass the value for which we want to check the data type. So if I want to check the data type of my variable A here is 10. 10 is an integer value, I got class int, and this is the int that we used here, and the value which we want to convert, we passed it as parameter, just as we passed A here as parameter. So now let's say I want to check the class of my float variables, and my float value is assigned in my B variable, but let's say I don't want to use B or I can't find B, so I can just directly pass 1.0. Now let's see if we don't want to specify the decimal places, that is we don't want to mention what are the values after decimal point, so we can just directly write 1 point, and we don't know what are the values after that decimal point, so it will be treated as 1.0 by default, and we will get class float if we want to check the data type of that value. Now let's say I want to update my value of A after performing any operation on A, so that should be, let's say I assign A here, let's say A equals to 100 and my value is a 100. 10 here is overwritten by 100, so I got a 100. Now let's say I want to update my value of A as A plus 5, so my A should be 105, and I have got A as 105. So what happens here is Python calculates what is A.5 here, that will be 105, and he sees assignment operator here equals to here, and check the variable which is behind that, which is on the left side of that assignment operator, and update the value of that variable as the result he got here. So we got A as 105. Similarly, we can update the value of A with any operator we want to use. We want to perform any operation on it, we can directly update it. Now there are Python shorthands here which I also want to introduce you. If I want to update a particular value in that variable by a certain factor, by a certain number, or by a certain value, I can directly use A plus equals to 5. I've already got A as 105 here, so 105, I want to add 5 again in it, it should be 1010. Let's check, I got 1010. So this statement is same as this statement. I believe that's clear to you. Similarly, if I want to perform an updation on A, but I want to subtract this time, so I'll just use A minus equals to, which will A equals to A minus, and now I want to subtract it by, let's say, 50. So I should get A equals to A minus 50, and we have got A as 110, so 110 minus 50 should be 60. We got A as 60. The same thing will work on float variables too, so I'll not be lengthening this video. You can try it yourself, and if you are stuck somewhere, just leave it on the comments. Now I want you to introduce you to another data type in Python, and I also want to clarify that it's not used too often. It's just for specific cases which you might stumble upon, so I'll just mention it here and we won't be going in detail over this data type. So the new data type that we will be learning is complex numbers. If you have studied complex numbers in mathematics, you know that complex numbers are made up of two parts, real part and imaginary part. Now let's say I want to declare my variable z as, let's say I want the real part of my complex number as 5 and I want the imaginary part as 10. So Along with my imaginary part, I'll just have to specify j in front of that integer value or float value so that it treats it as imaginary part. What will happen if I don't put j? Let's say uh, let's say q equals to 5 plus j. Python will by default treat it as an expression, that is 5 plus 10, that will be 15. So mentioning z as 5 plus 10 j, the j here specify that it's an imaginary part, and this is what makes it complex number. Now let's check the data type of our z. We got complex here. Now let's convert an integer value to a complex value. If we know the class of that data type, we can easily typecast it. I'll just have to mention the class name, and I'll have to pass the value which I want to change. Let's say I want to convert 4 to complex. I got 4 plus 0j. So it assumed that the imaginary part will definitely be 0. That's why we got 0j, and real part will be 4 as it's just an integer. So 4 plus 0j. Now let's say I want to convert a complex number to integer. Now how can we convert a complex number to an integer value? We cannot, because we have to take account of imaginary part too in case of complex number while converting it to integer. That is why we cannot. Now let's try converting it. Let's say z. We got an error. I already told you reason why can't we convert it. That's what Python gave us the error. Can't convert complex to integer. That will be all for this video, and in next video we will be covering strings. Also, I want you all to experiment with these operators as much as you can so that you can get hang of it and you don't get stuck in these basic stuff again. Just experiment it and check the error. If you can't resolve the error, just leave it on the comment. I'll resolve the issue. That's all for this video. Until next time, thanks for watching.